So on the disassemble for the iPhone 4S, this is the same for the GSM and CDMA versions. Before we get into the disassemble, we're going to go over the tools you'll need for most of the repairs, or all the repairs on the phone. So we have two screwdrivers right here. We have our Penelope 5-point, or the star screwdriver. That's to remove the two screws at the bottom of the battery door. We have a Phillips head screwdriver. This is size 1.5 and it fits pretty much all the screws on the phone. I use two flathead screwdrivers. One's a finer tip than the other one. You can just use one to lift plugs up and kind of get into some tight spots. So the finer the tip, the better. With that, I have a pair of tweezers. These are magnetic tweezers. Sometimes I'll use also non-magnetic, and it's just nice sometimes you're trying to either handle certain parts of the phone and you don't want either screws or parts of the phone to stick to this. So set of tweezers. Have an eraser that I use for certain contact points on the phone to clean the motor or the speaker module. So the eraser will sometimes fix certain parts of the phone without actually having to replace any parts. And I have the tweezer or guitar picks I use to remove the LCD and digitizer assembly. So those come in handy. And then I have a toothbrush that I'll use for water damage repairs. Basically to spot clean the board, and I'll usually use rubbing alcohol with this. If the repair is more in depth and it needs to actually go into a full-fledged cleaning, then we'll use an ultrasonic cleaner with the cleaning solutions and solvents, and we'll cover that in a later chapter. But that's pretty much everything that I'll use. I will use a soldering iron to melt part of the retaining bracket for the volume cable repair, but other than that, that's pretty much everything that I will use. So what you'll want to do first before you take the phone apart is power the phone down and remove the SIM tray. So you can use a little SIM ejection tool and it'll pop this tray out, and you can just pull it out and set that aside. Now all the iPhone 4S's have the Penelope style screws. The older version iPhone 4s GSM some of them had Phillips head screws, and then the CDMA and the newer iPhone 4s, they all have the Penelope. So the 4S, you'll remove those two screws, and then we'll just lift and slide upward on the back. Once you get a little separation on that, you can just lift the back off and set that aside. Now we'll cover the battery repair right now. We're going to remove these two screws holding the battery terminal, or the plug, onto the board. Now when you remove those screws, be careful when you go to lift the actual terminal up, because you have this little pin right here, and you don't want to misplace or lose the pin. And it may fall around, it may fall out, but as long as you can find that little pin right there and set it aside, you'll be good to go. Now what most people will do, they'll either pull up on this tab, this plastic tab, and most of the time if you try to pull up on that, you'll actually end up tearing it. So that probably won't work. The other thing people will do is use sharp or metal objects to lift the battery up, and you don't want to do that, because if you disassemble, puncture, crush, heat, or burn the battery, it can actually start to smoke. So what I use is a guitar pick, and this allows you to get in between the battery and the frame of the phone without damaging the battery at all. And there's going to be adhesive on the inside right here under the battery, and also on the inside right there against the board. So what we'll do is we'll get kind of right in between the frame right there, just like that, and we'll start to kind of work the pick in, and we'll work it up and down just to loosen all that adhesive off the back of the battery. And once you get it in enough, you should be able to lift the battery up and remove it. Now, the new battery, the cable may or may not be bent like this. And if it's not, what you'll want to do is bend it kind of in half, so it gives you a little bit of a crease right there. But what you don't want to do is actually crease the cable. If you crease it, you may damage the cable, and then the battery may not work. So what we'll do, once we get it kind of bent in place, we'll just slide the battery in, and then we'll make sure that the cable right there will slide in the little space between the battery and the board. And once we get that in place, you'll want to put that pin back in. I'll cover that on the reassemble, but make sure if you try to put it together right now that the pin goes underneath the actual plug right there, or the terminal for the battery. So we'll get that out. Now the other thing you'll notice that I do is I'll actually set everything in order the way I take it out, because the one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want to take something out, misplace it, or mix the screws up. Because as you'll notice when we start to take this apart, that all these screws are different sizes, and that screw may or may not fit inside of that spot. And if you switch them, you can either strip the screws out, you can damage the receptors themselves for the screws, and then you may not be able to get any screws in there. So just mind, and be aware of what you're taking out. So at the top here, we'll start with the 5 screws holding the shield and the little retaining brackets down for all the plugs. And again, you'll notice as I take these out, I just set every single screw in order. And you'll notice too, I use my thumb kind of as a guide, just to lay my screwdriver on, so it makes it easier to steady my hand, so I can make it just a little faster to take the screws in and out. So what we'll do, we'll lift this little bracket up right here and set that aside. And then there's a clip right down here, and you'll see it kind of in between the cable, that it goes down and actually hooks into part of the frame. So we'll start at the top here and just kind of slide it down, and it should unhook that little clip right there. And then you'll just lift it upward, and these 2 little guides at the bottom should slide out. And then I'll show you on the close-up here the cables and plugs of what we have. We actually have 3 plugs here. There's a plug right here, a plug right there, and a plug underneath of this cable. So when you lift this one up, just be aware that there's going to be another one underneath. And these 3 plugs will lift up from the left to the right. And you have this camera plug, and that's going to lift from the bottom up. Same with the digitizer and the LCD plugs. Those will both lift from the bottom up as well. And the last thing we have is the antenna plug, or the Wi-Fi plug, and that's going to lift from the top down. So we'll go back to the main shot here, and being careful of the board, we're just going to gently but firmly lift all these plugs up. And then as we take the camera out, set that aside, and then we'll lift these 2 plugs up as well, and just give them a light bend upward. And the last thing we'll do is we will lift that antenna plug top down. Now to kind of clean things up, we'll just take our tab here and fold it backwards on itself. And then at the top, we're going to have this cover, and if we lift this cover up, we'll notice that there's another screw and this ground pin that touches the camera. And what I do with that protective cover, I'll just set it aside right here, just sticks on the side of the phone, and that way when I put everything back together, I remember, oh yeah, I need to put this cover back on the phone. So we'll remove that screw and the pin, and the pin may fall out, and that's fine. As long as you keep track of it right there, then you should be okay. We'll kind of work our way down, and we have this screw right in the middle of the phone. And then we're going to have two screws right here holding this retaining bracket over the charging plug, or the charging cable plug. So remove that one. And that one. And then we'll lift that off right there. And then we'll gently, in the corner, usually the left side, lift up the charging cable plug. And then you'll notice that we actually have a screw right here, the antenna cable, and then we have one screw right here and one screw up there. So we'll remove this bottom screw first. We'll lift the antenna plug, and then once we lift that up, we'll just kind of unwind it from this little metal guide right there. And then the last thing is we'll take these two screws out. And that's why I say to use a fine tip flathead screwdriver, because these are pretty fine heads, or the little guides for the screw head, and you want to make sure that you get that screwdriver in there without any damage to the board itself. Now, once you check everything and make sure that it's all unplugged and unscrewed and that everything looks good, what I'll do is I'll hold the top right of the board and then gently lift the bottom left, just to kind of wiggle it out and get enough separation to where I can just grab the board and slide it out. And if those cables get hung up or stuck, just grab them with your thumb and move them around, and that should allow you to be able to get the board out.